Hello again. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time trying to put into context the issue that's been discussed about long range missiles in the context of the war in Ukraine. Um, the first thing to grasp, I guess, is Russia, albeit at large cost to itself, is winning the war on the battlefield. It's highly attritional, almost World War One type warfare, very distressing and at huge human cost. And strange enough, when I was in Europe earlier this year, and more particular Poland recently, um, that I noticed there were huge numbers of fighting age Ukrainians who had left the country, in particular working in Poland and living in Poland. And I did ask some of them the obvious question that we can't ask here, because we don't really have freedom of speech or a free press, is, why why have you chosen to leave if your country is under attack? And they were fairly honest. Most of them, I didn't record them. It wouldn't be fair to do that. But the answers were essentially, we can earn money here that we couldn't have dreamed of, and we're not willing to step into Zelensky's meat grinder and give our lives up. And some of the more geopolitical savvy of them were able to see the war in the context of a proxy war between NATO and Russia, which is essentially what it is. And so it's a very bizarre context that so many people have been allowed to leave. Fighting age Ukrainians have been allowed to leave, and you have the coalition of the Wallies before there's even been a settlement on the war, rushing to put troops in to defend a country where large amounts of people have left. And I say all these things in the greatest respect to those who stayed behind to fight, because they're exceptionally brave in Ukraine. But let's take a context where, let's say, the war was frozen broadly where it is now, and a peace agreement structured around that. That creates some very difficult scenarios for the UK and Europe in particular, because essentially, from the Ukraine perspective, Ukraine would look at it and say, well, you've promised us victory and all these things that you could never really follow through on. And we've ended up in a worse position than we would have been had the peace talks not been scuppered by Boris Johnson and others in the early stages of the war back in 2022. The talks that were being brokered essentially by Turkey. So Ukraine would look at that and say, well, you scuppered those, you encouraged us to continue fighting, and we've ended up in a worse position than we would have if those talks would have been allowed to run their course, and we've lost a huge amount of lives in the course of that. And the other side would be, in the UK and Europe. So let's take UK and France as obvious examples, where the populations would look, and both those countries are in fiscal difficulty. The populations are being taxed to death, and public services are being cut and squeezed and so on. And people would turn around and say, well, we put huge amounts of money into this war, and Ukraine's ended up in a worse position than they would have had the peace talks in 2022, in the early stages of the war, been allowed to run their course. So people would be angry. So they also know that Trump has very limited patience for the war, and eventually he will possibly tire of it. And they have to kind of prevent that awkward eventuality by trying to look for ways of escalation. And that's really where your missiles come into it. We've seen Storm Shadow missiles the Russians are, have made quite credible claims that British personnel have been active in Ukraine for quite some time. So there's this provocation, and the culmination of that, I don't think it will get this far, but I may be wrong, is to try to get the Americans to release the Tomahawks, to fire long-range missiles into Russia to 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 put pressure on Putin to retaliate effectively. And you would assume what they would be looking for is for him to retaliate against NATO assets, whether they could be. Russia certainly has the capability to do so. I hope they don't. So far, they've avoided doing so, and then they can then justify further involvement and bring the United States further into the conflict and potentially even see troops going head to head with Russia. But that could never happen unless they have full buy-in of the United States. So that's why you're seeing these escalations around these missiles, and so far the Russians have kind of retorted by saying, "Are you aware of our capabilities? We could do serious damage too." Ultimately, it's not in anyone's interest to engage in these provocations. It should be guided towards peace, and I think the best way you would get peace is by Trump and Putin being allowed to thrash it out between themselves. He's not perfect, Trump, but there really is nobody else credible to lead that in a head-to-head format with Putin. They were close to doing that in Alaska, but they were scuppered by the Europeans. There were talks of another attempt in Hungary that was again scuppered by the Europeans, and you saw John Healey making some provocative claims about troops to undermine the process as well. So it's very, very unpleasant. It might be worth reflecting on the fact that we're all being put on offer to save an embarrassing situation in terms of the provocation that is being made with these missiles, and to avoid this embarrassing strategic defeat, which is never to become in the way of NATO. I don't support Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. It's could never do so. Although, of course, we have to respect the fact that the United Kingdom invaded Iraq and Afghanistan without first being attacked and led to huge loss of life. The other angle, of course, that they try to use is that this is one of Healy's famous falsities, is that Russia, effectively, our security starts in Ukraine. That's absolutely ridiculous. That's premised on the fact that Russia, which, to credit their army, has been dogged, but it's not covered itself in glory, is going to pile through Ukraine, Poland, Germany, France, and then just hop, skip, and a jump over the channel and take us over too. So this is complete nonsense. So they're trying to frame it in these very odd ways. They'll also say, "Oh, Putin's a dictator," and so on and so forth. For that, you'd have to go and canvass the views of the people of the Russian Federation from side to side and get their views on the degree of which he governs with their consent. Putin's a matter for them, not for us. And of course, on the matter of dictators, we have a far-right prime minister here using the original political spectrum, and we'll soon be seeing, we're told, fast-track trials, no juries, 36 minutes, where people who have stood up against what they perceive as genocide, who face terrorism charges. So, I think we need to be a little bit honest with ourselves and say that are we really as good as we say we are, and those that we oppose, are they all as bad as we say they are? There's a lot of hypocrisy in that, and you should watch out for it. I'm going to finish on a funnier note, and that is Nigel Farage's interview with Michel Hussein, and his comments on the FCA and the Bank of England. So listen in, and I'll give you a slight view on this.
whether it's the nuclear energy industry, which we led the world in just a few decades ago. We're very, very inventive. We're very creative. We're naturally a very entrepreneurial country. I just believe we've lost a sense of all of that.
So the Bank of England, if you think they're so out of step with where their focus should be, in your view, would you revoke their independence as Prime Minister?
Well, I think the bigger mistake was taking away banking regulation from them, from an organisation that had been doing it since 1694. Gave it to a bunch of tick box bureaucrats down in Canary Wharf.
Do you mean the Financial Conduct Authority?
Yeah, look,
so would you disband that?
They are useless. They are utterly useless. We did a complete...
Would you do away with them?
We did a radical rethink of what they are, what they're for, who they serve, what their purpose is.
Isn't the truth, though, you don't really... It's not a question of who does the regulation. I think you instinctively don't like regulation.
Yeah, so I think we've got this, it's the gist of what he's saying there. For what it's worth, I think he's made a mistake, I think, in terms of his understanding of prudential regulation and conduct regulation. The other aspect is I don't believe they are utterly useless, and utterly useless. Some of the things they do are quite reasonable, and they've had their successes, as I noted, even with the infamous "Do the Right Thing" sequel with the wonderful Wizard of Oz. Oh, sorry, the Wizard of Oz, wasn't it? Didn't quoted the movie, not the book. But he is right in terms of there needs to be a radical overthink and their purpose and who they serve. He's absolutely correct on that. And as I've said throughout all these videos, the heart of that is the conflict of interest between being a regulator and a prosecutor. And I also think there needs to be a deep investigation into the influence the legal industry has on the FCA. It's a very, very big earner for them, criminal cases, and that is something that has become stark to us as we've looked at the FCA. And slightly concerning that Farage, he never lets the detail get in the way of a good grift, and it probably shows you, despite their popularity, how far they really need to go. They don't really have a depth of understanding or any talent to really present themselves credibly as a national solution. It's early days, but yeah, when you hear sort of Farage, it was an interesting interview because Michelle Hussein's been schooled in the art of censorship through her time at the BBC, but she did a reasonably good job of trying to put Farage to task on detail and things like that, and he doesn't like detail. He likes throwaway comments, risk taking, all that stuff, but he doesn't like detail, and that's really the weakness of him and his party. That's it for now. Take care.